right, everyone, we'll get started here. Welcome and thank you for joining us here today for our weekly workshop. My name is Jim Schultens. I'm system engineer here at Variphy, and I'll be your host for today's session. We're joined by my fellow systems engineer, Victor Verba. How you doing today, Vic?
I'm good, Jim.
Are you ready for Thanksgiving? It's
Not
next
quite
week,
yet,
you
man.
know.
I'm not even ready for snow, man, and we got like 2 inches yesterday.
Well, we'll get you ready, hopefully. All right.
You come shovel.
All right, we'll get started here. We're going to start off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. Next, Vic will explain call detail search sets and how to build and use them. We'll pause for some Q&A and get some of your questions answered. During the demo, if you do have any questions, make sure to ask them in the Q&A panel in the bottom right corner of the screen. After Q&A, we'll award one lucky attendee a $50 Amazon gift card, so hang around to see if you've won. All right, a quick overview of Variphy. Variphy is the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR, UCCX, and Cube call analytics, customizable dashboards and widgets, remote phone control, change management, and dial plan management. But today we're going to focus on the call detail search sets. If you have any questions of any of our other features, please feel free to chat them over to me and we'll take those offline and get them answered for you promptly. All right, one more thing before we kick things off here. For those of you looking for a more hands-off Variphy experience, we do offer a managed consulting service. This is a service that provides a dedicated Variphy SE to do all the heavy lifting, giving you and your users complete hands-off experience. Think of us as an extension of your organization. This service provides upgrades, one-on-one training, report and dashboard building, or anything you need. Your dedicated Variphy system engineer has you covered. The only thing you have to do is reach out to us. If you'd like more information about our ECS service, feel free to reach out to your account manager, and we'd be happy to see if ECS is right for you. All right, we will pass control over to Vic here and lead us into the wild.
All right. Hey, everybody, and thank you guys for joining me today. There we go. So I want to thank you guys for joining us again here today. So everybody's that's using Variphy is relatively familiar with what a search set is. It's a way of bringing back a series of or pieces of information. You know, maybe you're searching for a phone number, or you're searching something from an extension, or building some metrics on a hunt group or a particular department. Pretty straightforward, but there's a lot more that you can do with search sets. So in this example, I'm going to kind of start off pretty high level, and then we're going to get into the weeds a little bit. So what I'm looking at here is just all calls to a department. You know, anything going to or from a particular department, and I have my metrics. It's pulling me back 1,200 calls to my maintenance department. Pretty straightforward. If I export these results, I can add kind of, you know, the common things we're used to, you know, looking at like abandoned calls, voicemail calls, just by moving those left to right, and that's going to produce exactly what I asked it to do. With search sets, there's a couple different ways. Maybe for perhaps I'm not just looking at my maintenance department. Maybe perhaps I also want to be able to see my owner services group in the same report. So what I'm looking at here are total calls for 2 different departments. And you can see I went up from about 1,200 calls to about 1,900. Now, if I export these results, pretty straightforward. I'm going to get a total summary for everything that I asked for. In other words, 2 different reports, or 2 different departments in this case. So pretty straightforward. This is kind of the reporting, you know, most folks are used to, is really just kind of pulling out standard metrics. And here you can see I've got my 2 departments in here, total of 1,900 calls, and, you know, all of the summary values. A lot of times, you know, having this is great, but you may want to separate these. You know, perhaps I want to see both of these departments individually and get a total count. So one of the nice little options, and this is just kind of a tip or a trick here, is when you're looking at your search sets, you're going to notice that you've got this guy over here that says match all criteria. So essentially what that means is whatever I'm searching, it has to meet both values. So in other words, all calls to or from my maintenance group, all calls to or from my owner services Cool little trick here is if you uncheck this, because I'm only looking at 2 different values. In other words, I'm searching one thing, but for 2 different values. So if I uncheck that guy and run this report, cool little tip or trick here is this is actually going to break out the values for both of those departments and then give me a total summary also. So if we take a look at this guy, you're going to see that it went from a single line entry that gave me 1,906 calls to how many calls are to or from my maintenance group or how many calls are to or from my owner services group. So nice little tip or trick if you're trying to break out the departments separately. We're going to get a little bit more into that and building out different search sets because there's 2 different ways to really kind of accomplish the same thing. But that little check mark is a great way to be able to just kind of break out a single search set, which is my ad hoc search set right here, into 2 different categories because I am searching on 2 different pieces of information. All right, so that's kind of trick number 1. Now, the other usefulness behind that is, let's say, for example, I want to add another filter in here. And I'm just going to keep it simple. I'll just say, a duration filter. So I want to be able to look for all calls that are, greater than, we'll say, a minute. This is one place that you could also get yourself into trouble. So right now, you'll notice I am matching all search criteria. That's the default when it pops out of the box, and this is going to give me all calls that are over 60 seconds for my maintenance and owner services group. If I export these results, you're going to see that I'm going to have, again, a combined search of all calls for my 2 groups that are over 60 seconds. So one thing to kind of keep in mind when you're using that checkbox there is once I unselect that, rather than a cumulative search of all calls greater than 60 seconds for my 2 departments, it's going to go ahead and break out all of the calls. So essentially what that's going to do is it's going to take each of my filters being all calls to maintenance, all calls to owner services, but also every call in my system that is over 60 seconds. So just to kind of give you an example, if I check mark this guy. So if I view results here, one of the things you're going to notice here is we went from 1,900 calls to 3,000 calls. No longer am I focusing on just my maintenance department or my owner services department. I'm focusing on all of my calls to my maintenance group, to my owner services, but also all calls greater than 60 seconds. And if I export these results, I'm going to turn off details so we can make this go a little bit faster here. Essentially what you're going to see here is total summary for all calls over 60 seconds. You're going to see total summary for all calls to my maintenance group and to my owner services group. All right, so that check mark is really differentiating between an and or statement and allowing you to break out each of the individual search criteria really into their own bucket. So great way to be able to utilize that is to get multiple pieces of information, but doing it based off of one search criteria. Sometimes that is not the only way you can do it, or it's just not going to provide you the information that you're looking for. So another great example we have is, let's say, and I'm going to use departments in this example as well, just because it's easy to do, but this could be site-to-site calls, device pool to device pool, office to office, location to location, branch to branch, station 1 to station 2. A lot of times you may want to be able to build out, call flows. In other words, how are my calls flowing? Maybe you're getting ready to implement some least cost routing, or you just want to see how often one location is calling another location. Besides being able to just add a single search set, you can also add multiple search sets. So let's go ahead and build out an example. So I'm going to remove this guy, and we're just going to focus in on, we'll start with my, my maintenance department. Right. So if I'm searching this, right now what I'm looking for is all calls to or from my maintenance department. Maybe I'm really looking for something a little bit more specific. Maybe I want to see how many times maintenance calls a different department. So rather than focusing on all calls going to this department, I'm going to focus in on just calls being placed from my maintenance department. So to do that, I'm just simply going to say, hey, all calls originating from my maintenance department. And there we go. If I run this right now, it's going to show me all calls going from my maintenance department to anywhere in the world. one department or another. But I want to break this down a little bit more. I don't want to just show all calls to my maintenance department. I want to see all the calls that went from my maintenance group to my rentals group. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and also add maybe the terminating or dialed department. And you know what, we'll do two. We'll do department here, and we're going to go ahead and say I want to see all calls that were dialed or terminated to my rentals department. And I'm just going to pick on my rentals department because I know I have some cross traffic there. Now, I'm going to match all search criteria. So if I didn't do this, I'm basically going to show all calls that went to my rentals group, but also all calls that originated, not necessarily the combination of the two. So by check marking that guy, this is going to show me all calls that originated from my maintenance group and went over to my rentals group. So if we view that, we're going to see all calls that are just one-way traffic. Now, the cool thing about search sets is you're not limited to just one. Maybe I'm really trying to develop some route patterns, or like I said, implement some type of least cost routing, or just see how my intra cluster calling is being handled or managed. Who's calling what department the most, things like that. So if I export this report, this is going to bring us to the report building screen, and we're going to just kind of build something out because we may go back to it. All right, I'm just going to give it a simple name. We'll save it. Like I said, we may go back to this guy. Now you'll notice I have my search set here, and we'll say this is calls from maintenance to rentals. And what we're going to have here is all calls going from my maintenance group to my rentals group. And I have my summary values, how many are being answered, how many are being abandoned, going to voicemail, things like that, kind of all the standard statistics. But what's also important is I may want to know how many calls are going from my rentals group over to my maintenance group. So I'm really developing that picture of how that traffic is flowing between the two different departments in this case. Now, keep in mind, I'm picking on departments because I have some simplistic data here. This may be device pools, calls going from one site to another site. It may be a series of extensions, or maybe you want to use IP addresses of phones to designate calls going from different locations. This is also something that we really utilize, and I'll show that in a second, is to determine kind of hard phone and soft phone calling. You know, soft phone adoption, soft phone maintenance, or hard phone adoption, or vice versa. So what I'm going to do here is I have my search created. I can't necessarily just add another filter in there because that's going to combine all of my summary values. But what I can do is create a new search set. Now what I've got here is a search set that's going to be completely independent of the other. So what I'm going to call this is calls from rentals to my maintenance group. So what I'm developing here is a total volume of calls that are flowing between these two entities. And very simply, we're going to say that originating department in this case is going to be my rentals department. And then also what we want to do is essentially we're just flipping these. So now my dialed or terminating department is going to be my maintenance department. Here we go. All right, so I'm leaving the option to match all checked. I want that turned on, and that is going to be turned on by default because I want this to be accumulative. I want it to say all calls from rentals that only went to my maintenance department. I'm not looking for all calls that went to my maintenance group and all calls that went that originated from my rentals department. So let's take a look at the damage that we've done here, and I know I've saved this guy. We'll copy that just in case I need it, and let's take a quick look at our report. There we go. And there we are. So now if I'm looking to try to determine call flow, I get a very accurate portrayal of how many times rentals is calling my maintenance. So I could see 52 calls went from rentals to maintenance, 25 of those were answered, 2 of them were abandoned, 3 of them went to voicemail, and I probably have some connected or not connected in there. And then if I want to see how often maintenance is calling my rentals group, I could see there are 21 times they called, 13 of those were answered, 1 of them was abandoned, and 7 of them went to voicemail. So great way to be able to leverage search sets is not just to rely on one search set. You have the ability to add multiple search sets to put more criteria into a single report than just being able to add a single search set and get what you're looking for and then rely on some groupings. But you can go a lot deeper than that. So one of the things that you'll notice that I do a lot of is I do a lot with hunt groups. We have a lot of customers that are looking for hunt group metrics. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead, oops, helps if I can spell, and I'm going to pick on a particular hunt group here. And we're going to pick on our 77280 hunt group. And I'm going to focus in on just the calls that are really going to that hunt group. I'm going to kind of eliminate some of the transfer legs, and I'm going to do that by using the cause codes and that normal call clearing. Anybody that's been able to attend any of our webinars, that normal call clearing indicates that that is the end of a call. So I'm essentially isolating all calls that go to the 77280, but I'm kind of ruling out some of the transfer legs where a call goes to a hunt group and gets transferred in, something that we kind of call connection legs. All right, so the first thing I'm doing is isolating. I've got 83 calls that went to my hunt group, and this is great hunt group information. If I'm looking to try to develop a good statistic and a good report on, kind of how my hunt group is handling calls, this is a great high-level report to be able to look at. And I'm going to save this because we're going to definitely go back to this guy. I'm going to add the standard hunt group metrics that we like to see, the total call count, answered call count, voicemail. I'm going to add some things like some graphs in there. Maybe we want to see how often calls are going to the hunt group, the busy hours of the day, how many calls are being abandoned. And in my particular hunt group, we can also send calls to voicemail. We can also queue calls in here. So I'm going to go ahead and run this. We are going to turn on some detail, and we're going to look through some of our detail fields, although I'm going to take a lot of this off because a lot of this isn't going to be super necessary. But I am going to keep a couple things in here. I'm going to keep my originating cause code and my terminating cause code. All right. Those are going to be important because they tell us the reasons calls end. Another field that I'm going to go ahead and add in here, because we're going to build off of this report, is I'm going to add what's called an original called party redirect reason. And this tells us why the original called party, in my case, the original called party is the hunt group, is redirecting a call or sending it off to another location. So I'm going to go ahead and put that guy in here, and you're going to see why once we really kind of get into the guts of this report. I'm going to turn on the cradle to grave here so we can see what this data looks like. And then we're going to run this, and I'm going to talk about what we're going to do next and why we're going to go ahead and do it. So this report is a template that we've got available for download on our website. So if you're ever looking for some general hunt group reports, for the most part, this is a spot-on report that you can generate just by plugging in your hunt group number. And what are we seeing here? We're seeing all calls. We have 183 calls that went to our hunt group. 133 of them were answered, and I usually like to add percents in here. 2 of them were abandoned. 51 of them went to voicemail. These are great numbers. This is telling me overall, how my customers are being handled. And actually, I'm going to go back to this report, and we're going to go ahead and add some hunt group information in here. Let's go ahead and find that. I know I saved that guy, so let's pop into him. There we are. So I want to add some percentages in here just because for when I'm looking at hunt groups, I always like to see percentages. Sometimes it's just easier than call counts. So I'll add my answered, abandoned, and voicemail in there and just kind of shift these guys around. And I'm just going to pull those counts out for now. All right, let's take a look at this guy now. Give him a quick run and we'll see some different percentages. Now, like I said, this is a great example of a hunt group. This is just using a standard search criteria. But a lot of times when we're looking at hunt groups, the high level is great. That tells me essentially how those customers are being handled from the perspective of, are we answering calls? How many calls are we unable to get to? How many calls are going to voicemail? But it doesn't necessarily tell me the overall experience that the customer is having. Sure, you can see 1% of the calls are abandoned, 30% of the calls go to voicemail. Again, that's a very solid metric when you're looking at the quality, when you're starting to look at it from a staffing perspective. How are we handling calls? When do we need to have more people in the office to be able to make sure we handle calls here? Right off the bat, I could see my 8 o'clock hour. I've got a ton of calls going to the voicemail. That's a problem. That means I know I need to have my staff on hand during the 8 o'clock hour. All right, this is a fantastic report. But when we look through the detail of this report, and I'm going to blow this guy up a little bit so we can see it, there's a lot of other things that can go on in hunt groups. Calls can come in through main numbers, go to auto attendance, and then go to the hunt group. But you can also have people transfer calls to the hunt group. So when we start to talk about hunt group metrics, the overall high level is great to understand how you're doing from a staffing perspective, how you're handling calls, but there's a lot more going on. You may want to see things like, well, how many calls are coming through the main line and how many calls are being transferred from other departments into my hunt group, because that affects all those callers coming into the main line. Other things that you may want to be able to look at are, how many calls are going to the queues. If you use native call queuing, calls can be queued. So you may want to see how many calls are going to the queue, but also potentially how many calls are being abandoned. In other words, not waiting in those calls. Other things that are important when we start to talk about hunt groups or any kind of data sets are, what happens, how many calls come in when nobody's logged into the hunt group? Do we have a problem with that? So when we look at these stats up at the top, they're great, but they don't tell us all of those other metrics that I just mentioned. They don't tell us how many people maybe ended up at voicemail because just nobody was logged into the hunt group. Or they don't tell us how many people may have abandoned because all of our agents were busy. And that's something that you can actually build out with search sets. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a little bit of a deeper dive into search sets and how we can actually pick out some of that criteria to not only see those high-level stats of how those calls are being handled, but what are some of those customer experiences? Where are the problems that we're falling short that is causing 30% of my calls to go into voicemail? And we're going to go ahead and use a combination of the data and a combination of search sets to be able to do that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and look at the cradle to grave. This is a call that came into my hunt group right here. I could see this is a call that went to my hunt group and went over to a user. Now, what we want to look at is how did this call get to the hunt group? All right, this call bounced through multiple locations, went to a contact center, and then got transferred to my hunt group. I can actually see the transferring number right here, sending the call into my hunt group where it got answered over here by Lindsay. So one thing that may be important, and again, this depends on your environment, is understanding how many calls are being transferred from other departments into your hunt group. Now, looking at this call, I can see that this call was transferred in because it's coming from an extension in my organization. Where if I scroll through here, even just looking at my second call, this is a call, hit the hunt group and got answered here by Lindsay also. So right there, I have a difference to be able to identify calls that came through my main auto attendant to my hunt group, but calls that were transferred in. The difference is if a call gets transferred from somebody else within my organization into the hunt group, that means that the calling party number is going to go ahead and be an extension within my organization. It's not going to be the person's caller ID on that first call. So the first filter we're going to go ahead and create is one to show how many calls are being transferred into my hunt group from different users in my organization. And again, this is where some of the power of hunt groups and search sets can also come in. We've got our search set. We're just going to call this all calls to hunt, whoops, if I could spell. Still can't spell. There we go. So all calls to hunt group 77280, because that's what this search set is identifying. But the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create another search set. We're going to call this calls transferred to my from internal orgs. All right, so we're going to give this guy a name. Now, we know first thing we need to do is we need to capture all the calls going to the hunt group. That's kind of rule number one. We still need that number. So we're going to set our original called party number as the hunt group number. All right, very clear. We can also use the normal call clearing, although we're not going to because these are transferred calls. How do we know a call is transferred in? Well, we identified that through our cradle to grave. And let me blow this guy back up. And that was sequence, I think. What sequence was that? Sequence number 1. We can identify the calls being transferred to our hunt group from internally based on the calling party being a 4-digit number. In my case, 4-digit numbers are extensions. I could also base this off of phones. So you're not limited to just what we're going to be using here. There's a lot of different pieces of information in your data to be able to identify calls that are being transferred from internal organizations. In my case, it's going to be easy. I'm just going to say any call that is coming to my hunt group from a 4-digit number is being transferred from somebody somewhere else in my organization. So all I have to say is calling party number equals 4 digits. And that now I've identified all of the calls in my hunt group, but also all of the calls that are being transferred from other parts of my organization. So if I save this guy, now what you're going to see are 2 separate sets of summary. 1, the number of calls being transferred in, and 2, the number of calls that are being the number of calls that are totally going to your hunt group. All right, let's take a look at this guy. And our search time window is good. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take a look at some of the other things that are valuable. And here we go. So we have all calls to our hunt group right there. We have 183 calls. 45 of those were transferred in from different parts of my organization. That means that those 45 are not going through my main auto attendant, not coming from my main number, but I have other people within my organization transferring those calls. So great use of being able to use multiple search sets. Now, another very important metric, and why we added some of the other fields in there, is, you know what, maybe we want to see how many of these calls are coming in when there are no agents logged in. So another very common metric that we use with hunt groups. Again, what we're designing here is a way to not just see how the calls were handled, you know, average answered, average voicemail, average abandoned. We're developing a journey that these customers are going through and how often they're experiencing these potential problems with how those calls are being handled. So another little trick I'm going to show you here is if you name these guys like this, they're always going to stay in the order. So your search sets are in alphabetical order. Same thing with a number. So if I say, hey, number 1, I want to see all calls to the hunt group. Number 2, all calls transferred into the hunt group. So now I can go ahead and create number 3. So we'll just call this 3. We'll say all calls received when no agents logged. All right, so we're just going to give this a general name. Again, first thing we're going to do is, 1, we have to capture all of the calls to the hunt group. So we're going to use our original called party number here. There. Now, the next thing we want to go ahead and capture on this is we want to find out when people are not logged into the hunt group. So how do we know that? Well, we could take a look through our data. So in here, I have redirect information, and you'll notice that I added this guy in there intentionally. So if I take a look through this guy, he's going to give you valuable information. And this report, I could pretty much build using these 3 fields here. And right off of the bat, just looking through my data, I can see native call queuing redirected to second destination when no agent was logged in. That gives me a filterable value to tell me how many people have called into my organization when nobody was logged into the hunt group. So all we're going to do is we're going to take this field and we're going to add it to our search. And that was the redirect field that I added, and that was the original called party redirect field. And this is a drop-down pick list, and we're going to say no agent. There we go. So now what we're doing is we're isolating, again, all calls that went to here that also had a redirect. So now if I save this, you're going to see essentially what we've added is now we're starting to build out not just how many calls are answered, not answered, or abandoned. We're actually starting to build out what's happening with these calls as they're being answered, abandoned, or in my case, going to voicemail when nobody's logged in. So we're actually building that journey directly into this report using multiple search sets. So let's take a look at what we've got here. And the next thing I'm going to go ahead and show, just on the interest of time, is basically a created version of this. So here is a perfect example. I have 38 calls that came into my system when I had no agents logged in. 100% of those go to voicemail. Why? Because that's the way my system is set up. If somebody calls in when there is no agent logged in, it's still going to the hunt group, but then it's going to punt them automatically to voicemail. Yours may do something different. It may send them to a different hunt group. It may just play a message for them and terminate the call. That depends on your setup. But in my case, they go to voicemail, and now I've identified out of 183 calls, 45 of those are transferred in from different organizations. 38 of those calls ended up in voicemail because I didn't have an agent logged in. Now, I can easily break this out and say, oh, when did these times happen? I can easily break this out into its own search and find out exactly when this is taking place. Is it during business hours? Is it after business hours? Or I can filter my report down to just business hours and see if this is taking place during the day. So the next report I'm going to show you is we've been focusing in on this hunt group. And as we can see here, we've got 183 calls that went to the hunt group. And what we're doing is we're building out the metrics to show how those individual calls are being handled. So this report that I'm going to go ahead and show you here is based off of a customer inquiry. So one of our customers was looking for deeper metrics and trying to figure out how they can use Variphy to really dive into the metrics on their call center. So this report right here is based around that same hunt group number. And what this guy has is a breakdown of all of the various things that can take place within my hunt group. What we did is we really just kind of catered hunt groups to their organization. But one of the things you're going to notice here are we have 9 different things that could take place for this hunt group. So this same exact hunt group that had 183 calls, what we've done is we've used different search sets to identify each of the experiences that the callers are taking place. How many calls came in that weren't queued? 122 of them. That's awesome. We answered 121 of them. How many calls were queued? 10 of them. How many calls abandoned in the queue? Just 1. Now, you may look at this and be like, oh, this is a complex report. We used all of 4 different filters to develop all of this information. That is the original called party being the hunt group. We used our terminating and originating cause codes. And we used our last redirect reason. And last but not least was the one that I had mentioned, and that was the original called party redirect reason. So those fields alone were how we were able to build out all of these metrics to provide this customer not only how many calls are being answered or abandoned, but also what the customer's journey is as they're calling this hunt group. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with just identifying how the calls are being handled, but there's often times where you're going to want to use multiple search sets to really dig into the metrics of not just how they are handled, but when are they being handled throughout the different routines that can go through my hunt group. So I know that was a lot at you, threw a lot at you, but I did want to show you some of the benefits of those search sets, how to use those different search sets and pick some of that information out of the data to find meaningful pieces of information besides just how the hunt group is doing, what the hunt group is doing. And I'll go ahead and back to you, Jim.
Thanks, Vic. That was very good. Thank you. And so good that we don't have any questions at this time. So
Good, because we're out of
go
time.
ahead. Interest of time, I'm going to take over here. That out of the way. And all right. I don't think there was any other last minute questions that came in. So thank you very much. Very informative, Vic. And now, move on. All right. Real quick here, I'd like to mention our online user community, Planet Variphy. This is a place where you can connect with your peers and expand your knowledge of all things Variphy, or chat in the cantina about your favorite movies, sports teams, food and drink recipes, or whatever else you want to chat about. All right. And now it's the time you've all been waiting for. Thanks for hanging around. And the winner of this week's $50 Amazon gift card is Ravi Sagu. Congratulations, Ravi. And thanks for joining. Your account manager will be in touch with you to get you paid. Just want to mention there is no workshop next week. We're taking a break for Thanksgiving. So wish you and all yours a happy Thanksgiving. And we're thankful for all you customers out there. All right. And the week after that is November 30th. So we're going to have our workshop on computed ring time. And John Delane and Matt Sykes will be your hosts and panelists for that. So look forward to that webinar or workshop. And with all that said, I'd like to thank you again for taking time out of your day to join us. Have a great week and happy Thanksgiving.
Thanks all. Happy Thanksgiving.